Northern California is home to some of the most beautiful terrain that the United States has to offer, but there's one location in particular that proves to be just as mysterious as it is breathtaking. Few places have such a huge variety of strange phenomena which seem to emanate from a singular location, and for this reason, Mount Shasta has been the subject of numerous news articles, scientific studies, and research expeditions in order to find out why the mountain has such a large amount of supernatural activity. In today's show, we'll be discussing the odd history surrounding this area and some of the unbelievable and unsettling experiences that many people have had on or around its slopes. So please join me as we explore one of North America's most sacred and active paranormal locations.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground, which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision, I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7-8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
Welcome to Paranormal Mysteries, and thank you for being here. I'm your host, Nick Ryan. I'd like to start the show by saying thank you to our listeners, and of course, our supporters on Patreon. I'd also like to welcome our newest patrons, Sonia and Katie. Your support and generosity is amazing, and it makes our podcast possible. For a full list of our wonderful supporters, please see the show notes. Mount Shasta, located near the Oregon border in Northern California, holds the distinction of being one of the world's preeminent sacred mountains. Artifacts found in the surrounding area conservatively suggest at least 11,000 years of human habitation, designating this region as one of the longest occupied areas of North America. On a clear day, Mount Shasta can be seen from over 140 miles away. The mountain, part of the 1,000-mile-long Cascade Range, stretching from Northern California to British Columbia, is one of the largest stratovolcanoes in the world, rising to an altitude of 14,179 feet. It is also part of a chain of volcanoes that encompasses the Pacific Basin's notorious Ring of Fire, along which the majority of the planet's earthquakes and eruptions occur. Experts say that a volcanic eruption from Mount Shasta could match or exceed the scale of the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. The effects of an eruption on the surrounding towns close to the base of the mountain are predicted to be catastrophic, and because volcanoes stay active for years after eruption, the region may have to be closed off to the public for a very long time. As we start tonight's show, I'd like to first share an article from Mysterious Universe. The article says this: there can be no doubt that Mount Shasta casts a rather startling, imposing presence for those who first lay eyes upon it. Lying within the southern end of the Cascade Range in Siskiyou County, California, Mount Shasta is a now dormant volcano which soars over the surrounding forested valley, as it's the second highest peak of the Cascade Range and the 5th highest mountain in all of California. Since Mount Shasta is not connected to any other surrounding mountains nearby, it stands alone, bursting abruptly and steeply from the ground, like some mystical solitary giant, to loom over the majestic valleys of green around it, and completely dominating the landscape of Northern California. When naturalist John Muir first laid eyes upon the spectacular mountain in 1874, he famously said, "I was 50 miles away, afoot, alone and weary, yet all of my blood turned to wine, and I have not been weary since." Considering its solitary, dominating presence and appearance out of seemingly nowhere, and steep, almost pyramid-like shape, which often attracts an ethereal, whirling crown of frequently oddly shaped clouds, it is perhaps no surprise that Mount Shasta has long been the origin of numerous fantastic tales, myths, and legends since the very first Native American tribes who inhabited the region. The Modoc, Wintu, Akumui, and Atsuwagi tribes all have once inhabited the area within the shadow of Mount Shasta, and all considered the looming mountain to be a deeply sacred place, which was considered too powerful for humans to actually live on, and which spawned various legends from each tribe. The native Modocs, for instance, believed the mountain was inhabited by the great spirit Skell, who was the spirit of the above world, and had created the mountain as a stepping stone from heaven, where he dwelled at the summit overlooking his domain far below. Skell was said to have frequent epic battles with his enemy, Lao, the spirit of the below world and darkness, who inhabited Mount Mazama in Oregon. It was said that Skell would hurl intensely hot boulders and fiery lava at his nemesis in a fury, and that this ultimately led to the eruption of Mount Mazama, which subsequently formed the volcanic basin of Crater Lake, a place that became known to the tribes as the domain of all evil, while Mount Shasta was revered as a land of blessings. The mountain is also the source of countless other native tales. Other native legends swirled around the mountain for generations. It was once believed that to go up the mountain past the tree line was to invite doom, as therein was the realm of the dead, the shaman, the damned, and a mystical race of evil dwarves, feared by the Wintu tribe. Mount Shasta was also said to be prowled by numerous spirits and magical beings, not all of them particularly benevolent, and was also the purported location of portals to other realms of existence. Curiously, many of these tribes have stories which speak of encountering a tribe of people they called the Shasta people, who were described as being shorter and darker than the Native Americans, and who had inhabited the region since long before their arrival. The legends say that these Shasta people were ruled by a great king who had brought a small group of his people from a mysterious land that existed far out over the Western Ocean, and that they had chosen this locale because the mountain's snowy peak reminded them of their home. When the Native American tribes came, it is said that the Shasta people were eventually driven out and went off to try and seek out their original homeland, which they lamented had been submerged by the sea. This is one theory as to where the name Mount Shasta came from, although there were others, and the mountain has been known by many names over its history of human habitation, with the modern-day spelling of Shasta coming about in 1850, when it was chosen as the name of the county by the California state legislature. Legends, myths, and strange tales of the unknown permeating Mount Shasta are certainly not confined to the old Native American lore, and right up into the modern day, the majestic peak has been steeped in stories of all manner of high strangeness, so much so that it's hard to decide where to even begin. Perhaps the most enduring, well-known, and indeed most bizarre of these stories is that the mountain harbors an ancient, secret city inhabited by the descendants of the Lemurians, which are supposedly high technologically advanced people who are said to have been the first humans on Earth and lived on a lost, sunken continent known as Lemuria. The name Lemuria was coined in the mid-19th century to denote a hypothetical sunken continent that once bridged the Indian Ocean, and was so named because it was speculated that it was through this mysterious continent that lemurs had migrated from Madagascar to India. The story goes that as their continent sank due to some unspecified cataclysmic event, which some circles say was the very same that sunk the more well-known Atlantis, a number of Lemurians escaped to Mount Shasta to establish the city of Telos, somewhere under the mountain, where they recreated their once great society and purportedly continue to live to this day. The Lemurians are typically described as being graceful, thin, ethereal beings who are very tall, up to 7 feet in height, with fair skin, long, luxurious hair, and abnormally long necks, which they are said to decorate with collars made of beads, gold, or precious stones. The strange beings are usually clad in flowing white robes and sandals, although they are sometimes said to wear tunics or even walk about nude. They are said to have mastered various advanced technologies, such as atomic energy, magnetism, electronics, and some say even the ability to alter space-time itself, and they are believed to possess great levitating airships, which they use for transport. It is even claimed that they illuminate their subterranean realm with an artificial, miniature sun powered by some unknown, powerful energy source. The Lemurians are also purported to have a walnut-sized organ of some sort which protrudes from their foreheads and supposedly imbues them with vast psychic powers, such as ESP, telekinesis, telepathy, the ability to appear and disappear at will, and the power to influence the minds of others. The theory of Lemurians living within Mount Shasta has a history almost as odd as the purported beings themselves. The whole tale can probably best trace its beginnings back to a book called A Dweller on Two Planets, which was written by Frederick S. Oliver in 1899. In the summer of 1883, a teenage Oliver had been helping his family mark the boundaries of their mining claim, which entailed driving wooden stakes into the ground and then marking their location in a notebook. Allegedly, at some point during this arduous task, Oliver's hand began to shake and convulse uncontrollably, and started to write down things seemingly of its own volition. The boy ran home in a panic, his hand continuing to act of its own accord, writing feverishly the entire way, and as soon as he arrived, his mother gave him more paper to write on. The initial seizure stopped shortly after, revealing the beginnings of a text. Over the next 3 years, Oliver's hand would occasionally be overcome by this mysterious force, writing several pages here and there, until finally in 1895, he had completed an entire book, which chronicled and described the existence of the secret Lemurian city and their history. Oliver would go on to claim that he had been chosen by the Lemurians as their secretary of sorts, and that the whole book had been telepathically channeled through him and onto the paper via automatic writing. Oliver even went so far as to claim that he had been taken to the city itself and had seen it with his own eyes, describing it as being deep within the mountain and comprised of vast warrens of tunnels with secret automatic doors, elegant architecture, and apartments plated with gold and carpeted with a luxurious, fleecy substance. Indeed, the entire city was said by Oliver to be generously decked out in crystals, gold, silver, bronze, and precious stones, the whole of which was powered by crystal energies, brightly illuminated, and was inaccessible to outsiders without the expressed invitation of the Lemurians themselves. High technology was said to abound in this fantastical city, with numerous mentions of various incredible gadgets and vehicles employed by the city's residents, including large, cigar-shaped airships which hovered overhead. The book was quite groundbreaking and ahead of its time when it was released, making detailed mention of such high-concept notions as quantum mechanics, anti-gravity, mass transit, and zero-point energy, which he called dark side energy, all of which were extremely unique concepts at the time. Although Oliver died in 1899, at the age of 33, his bizarre book was finally published in 1905 by his mother, Mary Elizabeth Manley Oliver. At the time of the publication, Oliver's book became an instant occult classic and an openly acknowledged source for many New Age belief systems, sects, and cults. It would even spawn a sequel entitled An Earth Dweller's Return, but it would certainly not be the last literary mention of the strange lost city of the Lemurians on Mount Shasta. In fact, in 1931, Harvey Spencer Lewis, using the pseudonym Wissar Spenley Curvey, also wrote a whole book on the phenomenon, which further launched the popularity of the idea of lost cities and societies lurking within the depths of the mountain. From here, the accounts of this strange race of powerful beings and their highly sophisticated city of Telos really took off. Many more accounts concerning the purported Lemurian civilization of Mount Shasta would surface over the years. In the May 22, 1932 edition of the Los Angeles Times, there appeared the odd account of a Mr. Edward Lancer, who had been passing Mount Shasta in a train when he claimed to have seen the whole southern side of the mountain blaze to life with a brilliant, almost blinding, strange reddish-green illumination. When he asked the train conductor what it was that he had seen, he was assured that it had been the work of the Lemurians. The perplexed Lancer later went to investigate the strange light further and purportedly asked locals from the area's towns about what he had seen, to which they replied that there was a mysterious community of people living within the mountain who were known to perform rituals in the early morning and the evening, which made use of strange sources of brilliant light, which could have explained his sighting. This ceremony was allegedly known as the Ceremony of Adoration to Gautama, with Gautama being the Lemurian word for America, and the ceremony celebrating their ancestors' arrival on the continent after their own had tragically been swallowed beneath the waves. It was explained that these ceremonies used extremely bright sources of mysterious light, which were known to light up the whole side of the mountain. The locals also said that the Lemurians were known to come down from their secretive mountain realm into the town from time to time, towering, odd-looking folk, clad in their white robes and barefoot, who would buy huge amounts of sulfur, salt, and lard, which they would pay for in gold nuggets that far exceeded the value of the merchandise. Lancer made known his intentions to go up the mountain and find these Lemurians and the source of light he had seen. Lancer lamented that the local officials and ranchers freely ridiculed my avowed trek into the sacred precincts, assuring me that an entrance was as difficult and forbidden as an entrance into Tibet. After his hopes of ever finding the city were dashed, Lancer seemingly gave up on his quest, and it is unknown what exactly became of him, or whether he finally found what he was searching for, or merely faded into obscurity. In the June 27, 1940 edition of the Mount Shasta Herald, William Bridge Cook wrote of a Professor Edward L. Larkin of the Mount Lowe Observatory, who claimed to have observed the mystical city at great length through his telescope on several occasions. Larkin had allegedly discovered the city by accident as he was calibrating his telescope and spied something shining anomalously on the mountain. Finding this to be peculiar, he then focused on the object and found it to be an enormous, Oriental-style temple, which he described as a marvelous work of carved marble and onyx, rivaling in architectural splendor the magnificence of the temples of Yucatan. Larkin would go on to claim to have seen other temples on the mountain's side as well, including ones in an apparent Greek style, with magnificent, shining white marble columns. In addition to mentioning the opulent architecture, Larkin also claimed that the vicinity of the temples would often be beset by mysterious bright lights in the evening hours, and claimed that the temples and lights were from the descendants of the Lemurian people. He said this regarding the lights: "Their display of light far excels our modern electrical achievements, and I am, for one, consumed with curiosity to know how these people can produce such amazing light effects." In an odd twist, Larkin then apparently became sidetracked by other work, and was never able to locate the temples he had seen again. Cook then proceeds to spend most of the rest of the article trying to actively debunk the claim through the standpoint that it would have been physically impossible for Larkin to have seen what he claimed from his particular vantage point, but it is still a curious account, nonetheless. The Lemurians were also claimed to be able to influence their environment and to exhibit extraordinary architectural know-how. A 1962 edition of the Australian Flying Saucer Review mentions in an article by Andrew Thomas the curious case of a forest fire in 1931, which ravaged much of the mountain, yet was kept from advancing by the appearance of a mysterious fog, which halted the blaze in its tracks. In the aftermath of the fire, it was reportedly discovered that there was a perfectly clear and curved demarcation zone remaining between the charred earth and undamaged areas. It was said by locals that this was the work of the Lemurians, protecting their domain through some unknown technological wizardry. Likewise, it is said that their city and structures are impervious to the effects of the many earthquakes that ravaged the region, such as their architectural skill and perhaps even due to their alleged ability to control the earth itself. These Lemurian people and their strange devices have long been seen in the area right up to the present, with sightings and accounts too numerous to list here. Typically, they are seen walking along roads or even city streets of towns on Mount Shasta, only to suddenly disappear, as if they were never there at all, presumably due to their psychic abilities and uncanny expert knack for blending into their surroundings. Often, they are only glimpsed from the periphery vision and elude any efforts to spot them straight on. They are sometimes known to appear to help farmers who have fallen on hard times, using some sort of advanced agricultural techniques that revive the soil as if by magic. One account tells of a Lemurian woman who emerged from the forest in full view of a group of people and proceeded to lie down in the frigid water of Panther Springs for a full 5 minutes, before silently getting back up and walking back into the wilderness from whence she came, all the while dripping wet from the freezing water. There are also numerous sightings of a strange boat, which is said to sail as far as the Aleutian Islands, and will approach shore only to suddenly hover in the air and make its way to Mount Shasta. One old account even mentions a visit to San Francisco by a white-robed patriarch said to represent the Lemurian community, who was joined by an entourage of younger men and actually supposedly met with the city officials to bring a message of greetings and goodwill during World War I. Tales of people actually entering the wondrous, bejeweled Lemurian city abound as well. A Dr. M. Doriel claimed that he had penetrated into the mountain lair of the Lemurians and saw what he described as an enormous cavern that was an astounding 20 miles long, 15 miles wide, and 2 miles high, which was illuminated by a gigantic blazing artificial sun right in its center. Yet another account mentions a man who fell asleep on the mountain, only to be awakened by a Lemurian, who then brought him into a magnificent city paved with gold. One of the strangest stories of finding an underground city within Mount Shasta comes from a 1904 account, which first appeared in the 1934 edition of the Stockton Record, concerning a J.C. Brown, a British prospector who had come to the mountain with the Lord Cowdray Mining Company to prospect for gold. During this expedition, Brown allegedly stumbled across a tunnel in the hillside, which led down into the darkness below the mountain. The prospector decided to venture into the opening and found that it stretched several miles into the murk and ended in a complex of rooms full of ornate statues, crystals, shields, and gold and copper plates. There was also purportedly an enigmatic and extravagantly decorated burial chamber containing at least 27 mummies that were described as being between 6.5 to 10 feet in height, several of which were wrapped in some sort of ornamental robes. The discovery was touted by Brown as being one of the most exciting archaeological finds of the century, and eventually an expedition led by John C. Root and comprised of 80 members was brought together to further explore the tunnel based on these claims. However, on June 19, 1934, the day the exploration was set to set out from Stockton, California, J.C. Brown did not show up, and in fact, he was never seen again. It is a remarkable story to be sure, but seems highly suspicious, since the find was made allegedly in 1904, yet the story was not made public until 1934. What happened in the intervening 3 decades? Although more modern explorers have from time to time claimed to have found J.C. Brown's mysterious underground complex, its location, indeed if it ever really existed at all, remain a total mystery. Who exactly are these alleged Lemurians? Survivors of a long-lost continent? Aliens? Interdimensional beings, perhaps? Is there any truth whatsoever to these accounts? The mention of underground caves and caverns certainly seem to fit in with Native American legends, which tell of many vast complexes of hidden tunnels and bottomless pits scattered throughout the mountain. The area is known for its caves and tunnels, so this could have had something to do with the start of these stories. However, it is unknown if Lemurians or any other people for that matter have ever actually gone down and inhabited this area. Although the Lemurians of Mount Shasta are generally seen to be benevolent and non-violent, the same cannot be said of the truly outlandish tale of what were known as the Deros, short for degenerate robots, which were said to be Lemurian robots, which had gone insane and become malevolent machines bent on murder, mayhem, and destruction. The Deros tale was popularized in the 1940s by Richard Shaver, who believed them to be the source of all mankind's woes. As completely absurd as this may all sound, there was an interesting story related by researcher and author David Paulides about a young child who went missing while on a camping trip with his parents on Mount Shasta in 2011. The boy apparently suddenly disappeared without a trace and wasn't found for 5 hours, after which the shaken child came back with an extremely weird story to tell. According to him, he had been abducted by an evil robot that had looked and sounded just like his grandmother and had taken him into a huge underground cave populated by other human-looking robots, as well as giant spiders. The real grandmother later claimed to have woken up face down on the ground, feeling violently ill, and with a small puncture wound on the back of her neck, presumably so that the robot could steal the genetic information it needed to duplicate her. As far out as this may all sound, Shaver's bizarre theories actually gained quite a bit of traction in their day, and were used by Hollow Earth theorists and ufologists extensively at the time. Although these theories eventually fell out of favor, partially due to their oddness, one interesting piece of the story was Shaver's claim that he had deciphered the language of the Lemurians, which he insisted all Earth languages derived from. This strange claim is made even stranger by the fact that the complex language and writing system presented by Shaver, as well as the cipher itself, are actually considered to be enormously detailed, meticulous, and quite linguistically accurate. Was this just the ramblings of a madman with an obsessive devotion to even the most minor details, or is there something more to it? In 1930, an American mining engineer by the name of Guy Warren Ballard came to Mount Shasta and while out hiking one day, claimed he came across a man in the woods who identified himself as none other than Saint Germain, a European mystic from the early 18th century who some have theorized was actually immortal. Ballard went on to report having several encounters with Saint Germain, who told him that he was an ascended master, or a spiritually enlightened being who is immortal, free of the cycles of re-embodiment and karma, and endowed with vast magical powers. These ascended masters considered Jesus Christ among their ranks, and many were said to live reclusively around the Cascades. During these encounters, Ballard claimed that Saint Germain had taken him to various caves and magical places upon the mountain to teach him the way towards enlightenment. Ballard would later go on to write extensively of his alleged meetings with this mysterious figure in a series of books called Unveiled Mysteries and the Magic Presence, under the pen name Godfrey Ray King, and he went on to give lectures on these mystical experiences. This would all become the foundation which Ballard would build a spiritual movement called the Ufo Activity, which described itself as a spiritual and educational organization, espoused a list of teachings showing the path to enlightenment, called the Ascended Master Teachings, and which is still active in the area to this day. Adding to the list of enigmatic people who have found some kind of revelation here is a man who in 2011 went missing on the Pacific Crest Trail in the Mount Shasta wilderness for several weeks. When he suddenly returned as mysteriously as he had vanished, he claimed that while hiking, he had heard the sound of a woman singing and had gone off the trail to follow its source. He soon had become lost and was then abducted and taken to a cave where he was stripped of all his clothing. After that, he reportedly was approached by a tall and beautiful woman with unnaturally piercing blue eyes, who gave him some sort of secret information, which he would not divulge the nature of when asked. After this ordeal, the man went on to change his name to Lord Kalki and insisted that he was an incarnation of a Hindu god. Lemurians, mystical ascended masters, and mysterious blue-eyed ladies are not the only purported weird inhabitants of Mount Shasta. The area has long been a hotspot for Bigfoot activity as well. One of the most famous sightings was first reported in a 1976 edition of the Mount Shasta Herald. Virgil Larson, 47, a logger working south of Cascade Gulch, on the lower slopes of Mount Shasta, reported having an encounter with an enormous, hairy, and foul-smelling creature near a helicopter logging operation at around 8:30 a.m. Larson alleged that he had been with his partner, Pat Conway, in a pickup truck which they parked at the top of the hill before hiking down a steep slope. The two got separated, but could still hear each other, and this is when Larson claimed he had heard someone else approaching his position from the opposite direction, who he assumed at first to be someone from the Forest Service. When he could make out the shadow of who he thought was a man approaching, Larson called out to him, but whoever it was merely turned its head and kept walking, silently rounding a large bush about 20 yards away, almost as if to hide behind it. When the logger called out a second time, the figure reared up over the bush, and it became very clear that it was no human being. The creature was described as being covered with black, gnarled, matted hair, which was longer at the top of its head and seemed to be swept straight back from its eyebrows. Larson also mentioned that it had an overpowering stench, like a half-rotten bear hide. Terrified, Larson then ran off to tell his partner what he had seen. They returned to the area 30 minutes later, and it was reportedly still permeated by the odd, rotten stench. When they took a good look at the bush and held a hard hat up on a stick, they came to the estimation that the beast had been about 7 to 7.5 feet tall. Bigfoot have been regularly sighted all over the mountain for years, but one odd twist to many of these accounts that makes them a little different from the norm and really turn up the weird factor is the amount of them that mention a decidedly eerie paranormal angle. Mount Shasta Bigfoot have been variously described as materializing out of thin air and vanishing just as suddenly, levitating, passing through solid objects, and even entering and exiting spacecraft, making these reports a little more head-scratching than the more traditional Bigfoot sightings, which seem to typically describe flesh-and-blood animals. Are these phantoms, ghosts, interdimensional travelers, aliens, or just figments of the imagination? It's hard to say, but there certainly are a lot of people who claim to have seen them in the Mount Shasta area. Another phenomenon of Mount Shasta is the intense UFO activity reported on the mountain. Dancing lights, mysterious flashes, orbs, metallic craft, glowing objects, luminous cigar-shaped objects, jellyfish-like craft, silent silver airships, and fleets of lights making amazing maneuvers have all been reported from here since long before electricity was even a thing. Some people have put forth the theory that these UFOs have some connection to the Lemurian civilization reported to live within the mountain, a claim somewhat supported by sightings of UFOs disappearing into the clouds that often shroud Mount Shasta's summit or even right into the mountain itself. One interesting such sighting was made in 1956 by a resident named David Williamson, who observed a formation of 14 mysterious lights near the mountain for some time before one of the lights suddenly broke off and headed towards the mountain itself, descending straight down onto the summit where it vanished, presumably down some portal or opening. Whether these are craft used by the alleged Lemurians, some force within Mount Shasta, drawing visitors from beyond our world here, something coming through the numerous interdimensional portals claimed to dot the mountain, or if this is all merely some natural phenomena we have yet to understand. The fact is that something weird is going on, and UFO reports continue to pour in from the area all of the time. The list of high strangeness at Mount Shasta goes on. The water here is believed to have certain revitalizing and healing effects, so much so that many come from far and wide, with bottles and jugs to collect it. In addition to Bigfoot, the forests of the mountain are also said to be inhabited by a strange race of dwarves, as well as fairies. There are also a mysterious group of people called the Octavians, who are said to use sound waves to manipulate and shape reality. There are supposedly top-secret military installations operating deep underground in the bowels of the earth for some inscrutable and quite possibly sinister purpose. People claim that they are drawn to the mountain by some irresistible force and often arrive without really knowing why they came in the first place. Others have found themselves to be somehow hopelessly enthralled, mesmerized, or otherwise held emotionally captive by the mountain. The whole mountain is said to be the location of numerous portals to other dimensions, and locations that allow one to shift to the fifth dimension, or transcend time and space. When it comes to the bizarre, you name it, and Mount Shasta probably has it. One enduring belief about the mountain is that it serves as an extremely potent and powerful energy vortex, and is crisscrossed with ley lines which are intersecting paths of energy, similar to what is said about Stonehenge. All of this mysterious energy purportedly has a variety of astounding effects, such as revitalizing the spirit, enabling deep meditation, creating feelings of euphoria, causing vision quests, healing the body, bestowing profound spiritual guidance, allowing interdimensional travel or passage into the metaphysical realm, enhancing one's ability to astrally project or to channel spirits, and inspiring creativity, among others. No matter what your opinion of these phenomena might be, enough people believe them that these supposed energy vortices have made Mount Shasta a mecca for New Agers, spiritualists, Wiccans, cults, and all manner of those seeking some sort of spiritual revelation, who have flocked to Mount Shasta in droves. In fact, the mountain's main town, with a population of only 3,300, boasts around 100 spiritualist sects and no fewer than 30 New Age businesses, with 25% of the tourists who pass through coming for spiritual reasons or to reap some benefit from the energy vortex. In town, such visitors can enjoy spiritual healings, vision quests or shamanic awakenings, take spiritual attunement workshops, purchase crystals purportedly imbued with a variety of powers, or even take spiritual tours of the mountain, its vortices, and even the lost Lemurian city of Telos itself. What is it about Mount Shasta that inspires so much awe and wonder in people? What is it about this lonely mountain that draws to it so much of the inexplicable? Why do so many come here to seek something more than what our reality as we know it shows us? The mountain certainly has the ability to conjure up the deep, reflective ponderings in people. Before we end tonight's show, I'd like to share one final eyewitness encounter. This story comes from the website Phantoms and Monsters, which is owned by author, radio host, and blogger Lon Strickler. Lon does a wonderful job of curating and following up on the accounts that he receives, and I highly recommend that you check out his site. This account comes from a witness that refers to himself only as S. He says, "There's something haunting the woods of Mount Shasta. I don't know what it is, but I think I've seen it twice. Before I moved to Mount Shasta, I heard all the strange stories about the area, weird disappearances, underground alien bases, and UFOs, but I didn't take them seriously. I was living in the suburbs, which was as far away from anything strange as somebody can get. It's just not something you went around thinking about all the time. I lived in Mount Shasta for a couple of years before I really saw anything like the kinds of stories people tell here. Almost everyone you meet will talk about something they've seen after you get to know them. A couple of miles from town is Lake Siskiyou. There's miles of trails and shoreline to hike along and swim, surrounded by hills and forests. It was getting near the end of summer, and me and a friend camped out in the woods behind the lake. Before dark, we took the trail to the north shore of the lake and walked up into the forest, where we set up a tent in a wooded area. We were trying to be very quiet and didn't use any lights because it's illegal to camp here overnight. It was around midnight when we decided to go to the lake's north shore for a swim because it was too hot to fall asleep. We were walking on the trail back to the lake. It was dark and felt humid. As we continued down the path, we passed through a grassy area, and there was a mist hanging over this area about 3 or 4 feet off the ground, but just this one area, nowhere else. I remember my friend saying something about it because it seemed so unusual to her. A little further ahead, something crashed high up in the trees above us. We were both startled by the sound of branches splitting and breaking. Whatever it was made quite a bit of noise, like something scrambling to hide. It scared the hell out of both of us. When I turned around and looked up, I saw 2 large, glowing yellow eyes looking down from high up in the tree, but the rest of its form was hidden in the branches. It only looked down for a moment, and it must have turned away, because its shining eyes were gone a moment later. Then there was another crashing in the limbs, like something suddenly jumping or falling, breaking more branches, but nothing hit the ground. My friend wasn't looking up when this happened. She was looking directly behind us, but she heard it and turned around. As the second crashing happened, the tree limbs high up shook, causing broken branches and limbs to fall, but nothing large like an animal hit the ground, only falling debris. It freaked us out, so we both ran and got out of there. After we were further down the trail, I told her it was probably a bear or mountain lion climbing up the tree, and we must have scared it. But I couldn't forget how large its eyes must have been. For me to have been able to see them shining so brightly from high up in that tree, and the weird mist that was only in that grassy area, it bothered me, but I didn't say anything more about it, because I didn't want to freak my friend out for the rest of the night. It was probably an hour later, after we went swimming on the north shore, that we saw something again. We were both sitting on the sand having a smoke, and from behind us, we both heard a sound like huge wings flapping. We both turned around at the same time and saw this large, black, bat-like form soar directly over us, soaring at about the same height as the tallest trees. It crossed over the lake and then veered off towards the south, where it disappeared from view. The creature looked like a flying humanoid with bat-like wings, about the size of a tall man. It was far too big to be any kind of owl or bird, and we were both so freaked out that we didn't go back into the woods again that night. We just went back to the main campground adjacent to the lake and got in our car and drove home. I returned the next day with a friend to get our tent that we had left. My girlfriend didn't want to go back there. I looked around the area to see if there were any tracks or something, remembering that someone had told me that a long time ago, there were reported in the local newspaper to be 3-toed tracks up on Mount Shasta, but I couldn't find anything that looked out of the ordinary, and I've never seen anything like that since. But we don't go camping in remote places around the mountain anymore. I never knew how widespread the sightings of these flying creatures were until after this happened to me, and I started researching it online. That's how I found out that there is some truth to the strange things people claim to see around Mount Shasta. As is the case with most mysterious places, it's hard to form an opinion on the supposed phenomena without experiencing it for yourself. If any of you have visited Mount Shasta or the surrounding area and witnessed something out of the ordinary, I would love to hear about your experience. While I have personally driven past Mount Shasta and witnessed its beauty from afar, I have yet to step foot on its slopes and investigate the mysteries that lie within. Perhaps someday soon, its mysteries will be revealed to us all. If you or someone that you know has witnessed something unexplainable and you'd like to have your story shared on the podcast, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. Please remember, no matter how insignificant or outlandish you believe your experience may seem, I'd like to hear about it. You can also connect with us by joining our forum and by following us on social media. All of our contact information, as well as the sources used in today's episode, can be found in the show notes. If you'd like to support the podcast, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your friends. If you're interested in taking the next step and becoming a patron, you can visit patreon.com/paranormal mysteries. Benefits include ad-free episodes and early access to select shows. New episodes of the Paranormal Mysteries podcast are produced every Sunday, with a new midweek mysteries airing every Wednesday, and they're available on all of your favorite podcast apps. From all of us at the Paranormal Mysteries podcast, thank you so much for listening, and please remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.